Welcome back to another story on Infidelity Tales Lab. Before we begin, tell us, where in the world are you watching from? Now, let's dive into today's story. Chapter 1. The Golden Contract. The autumn rain drummed against the floor-to-ceiling windows of the Meridian Tower as Michael Carr adjusted his tie one final time. At 42, he had the kind of quiet confidence that came from building something from nothing. His construction company, Carr Industries, had grown from a two-man operation in his garage to one of the most respected firms in the Pacific Northwest. "Mr. Carr, they're ready for you," his assistant announced from the doorway. Michael nodded, gathering the contract documents that would change everything. $10 million for the biggest project of his career, the new downtown cultural center. 20 years of careful relationship building, strategic partnerships, and flawless execution had led to this moment. The boardroom was filled with the city's elite. Mayor Bradford smiled warmly as Michael entered, followed by the project committee members who had championed his bid. As Michael signed each page, he thought of Catherine, his wife of 18 years, and their children, Marissa and Brandon. They'd supported him through the lean years, or so he believed. "Congratulations, Michael," said Lorenzo Solomon, the project's lead financier. "Your reputation for integrity and innovation made this decision easy." After the ceremony, Michael drove through the familiar streets toward his Bellevue home, a sprawling colonial he designed and built himself. The anticipation of sharing this victory with his family filled him with warmth. Catherine had always dreamed of traveling to Europe, and Marissa was starting her junior year at Stanford, expensive dreams that were now within reach. The house was unusually quiet when he entered. No cooking smells from the kitchen, no sound of Catherine's afternoon yoga routine. He found her in the living room, speaking in hushed tones on her phone. When she saw him, her expression flickered with something he couldn't quite read. "I have to go," she said into the phone, hanging up quickly. "You're home early." "Catherine, I did it. We did it." Michael's smile was radiant. "The Cultural Center project, $10 million. We can finally." "That's nice, Michael." Her voice was flat, distracted. "Marissa called. She needs more money for her sorority." The dismissal stung, but Michael pushed past it. "Did you hear what I said? $10 million, Catherine. This changes everything for us." Catherine stood, smoothing her blonde hair. At 39, she still turned heads, though Michael had noticed a hardness creeping into her features over the years. "I heard you. Can we talk about this later? I have a hair appointment." As she gathered her purse, Michael reached for her hand. "Wait, this is important to me. To us. Can't you cancel?" "Don't be selfish, Michael." She pulled away sharply. "The world doesn't revolve around your little construction projects." Little construction projects. The words hit him like a physical blow. He'd built everything they had, every comfort, every opportunity. But as Catherine's heels clicked toward the garage, Michael felt a familiar hollow ache. When had she stopped seeing him as a partner and started treating him like an obligation? That evening, Marissa came home from her first semester break. At 20, she had Catherine's beauty, but with an entitled edge that troubled Michael. She barely looked up from her phone when he tried to share his news. "Dad, I need $5,000 for spring break," she announced over dinner. "Everyone's going to Cabo." "Marissa, your father just signed the biggest contract of his career," Michael said, hoping to connect with his daughter. "Cool," she replied, still scrolling. "So the money's not a problem then?" Brandon, their 18-year-old son, at least offered a genuine smile. "That's awesome, Dad. I'm proud of you." But even Brandon's encouragement felt overshadowed by the cold indifference from the women in his life. Michael had built an empire, but somehow he'd lost his family along the way. That night, as Catherine turned away from him in bed, Michael stared at the ceiling and wondered when everything had changed. He'd given them everything: security, luxury, opportunities, but had somehow failed to earn their respect. Tomorrow, he decided, things would be different. He'd make them understand what this contract meant, what he'd sacrificed to get here. He had no idea that tomorrow would shatter his world completely. Chapter 2. The Push. Michael woke before dawn, energized despite the previous evening's disappointments. He had a plan: surprise the family with a celebration dinner at Catherine's favorite restaurant, present them with the European vacation itinerary he'd been secretly planning, and reconnect with the people who mattered most. He spent the morning at the construction site, walking through the future cultural center location with his foreman, Howard Perry. Howard had been with him since the early days, a loyal friend who understood Michael's vision. "You seem different today, boss," Howard observed as they reviewed the architectural plans. "This contract's got you walking on air. It should set us up for the next decade, Howard, and it proves something I've been trying to show for years." Michael gazed at the empty lot that would soon house his masterpiece. "Catherine thinks what we do is just little construction projects. Tonight, I'm going to show her what we've really built." Howard frowned. "Michael, I don't usually comment on personal matters, but Catherine's been different lately. The guys have noticed." "Different how?" "She's been coming by the office more, asking questions about finances, contracts, and she's been real friendly with that lawyer, Earl Sherman, from the Davidson firm." A chill ran down Michael's spine. Earl Sherman handled divorces for the wealthy elite. "You're probably reading too much into it, Howard. She's just taking more interest in the business." But as Michael drove home that afternoon, Howard's words gnawed at him. Catherine had indeed been asking more questions about the company's assets, their investments, even the house's deed. He'd attributed it to her becoming more involved in their financial planning. The house was bustling with activity when he arrived. Catherine was in the kitchen, actually cooking, something she rarely did anymore. Marissa was setting the dining room table with their good china, and even Brandon was helping. "What's all this?" Michael asked, genuinely touched. "We wanted to celebrate your big contract," Catherine said, her smile bright and warm. "I made your favorite, braised short ribs." For a moment, Michael felt the love and connection he'd been missing. This was the Catherine he'd married, the woman who'd supported his dreams when they lived in a tiny apartment and ate ramen noodles for dinner. "And I invited Mom over," Catherine added. "She should be here any minute." Eileen Church arrived precisely at 6, her silver hair perfectly styled and her disapproval of Michael barely concealed as always. She'd never thought Catherine had married well, despite Michael's obvious success. "Michael," she said coolly, offering her cheek for a perfunctory kiss. "Catherine tells me you've gotten another construction job." $10 million, Mother," Catherine corrected with a laugh. "The biggest contract in the company's history." Throughout dinner, the conversation felt strangely forced. Catherine asked detailed questions about the project timeline, the payment schedule, and the company's current cash flow. Marissa seemed unusually interested in their investments and property holdings. Even Eileen peppered him with questions about his business partnerships and insurance policies. Why all the sudden interest in the business? Michael finally asked, "Can a wife be proud of her husband's success?" Catherine's laugh sounded hollow. "We've just realized how much we don't know about what you do." After dinner, as they moved to the living room, Michael felt a strange tension in the air. Catherine was pouring wine with shaking hands, and Marissa kept glancing nervously at her mother. "Actually, Michael," Catherine said, her voice taking on a different tone, "there's something we need to discuss." "About us?" The words hit him like ice water. "What about us?" "I think we both know this marriage hasn't been working for a long time." Catherine's mask finally slipped, revealing a coldness that made Michael's blood freeze. "I've filed for divorce." The room spun. "What?" "Catherine, what are you talking about?" "We can work through whatever." "There's nothing to work through, Michael. I've been miserable for years. You're boring, predictable, and frankly, you've never been enough for me." "Mom's right, Dad," Marissa added, her voice cruel. "You think you're so successful, but you're just a blue-collar worker who got lucky. Do you know how embarrassing it is to tell my friends my father works in construction?" Michael felt like he was drowning. "This is about the contract, isn't it? You waited until I signed it." "Of course it is," Catherine snapped. "Did you think I was going to stay married to you while we struggled? Now that there's finally real money, I want my half. Actually, I want more than half. I've been documenting your neglect, your anger issues, your drinking. I don't have anger issues or drinking problems." "You do now," Eileen said with a satisfied smile. "We have quite a file compiled. I've already moved your things to the guest room," Catherine continued. "The papers will be served tomorrow. My lawyer says I have an excellent case for getting the house majority custody of Brandon, substantial alimony, and at least 60% of the business. Earl Sherman, Michael said quietly, the pieces falling into place. Smart and handsome, Catherine smiled. Everything you're not. The betrayal was so complete, so calculated, that Michael could barely breathe. 18 years, Catherine. 18 years I've given you everything. You gave me a boring life with a boring man. Now I want excitement, travel, culture, things you could never provide. Michael stood on unsteady legs, looking at the faces of his family, his wife, his daughter, his mother-in-law, all watching him with varying degrees of satisfaction and disgust. Only Brandon looked uncomfortable, unable to meet his father's eyes. This is really what you want? Michael asked Catherine one final time. It's what I've wanted for years. I just needed you to finally be worth something first. Something snapped inside Michael. The betrayal, the calculated cruelty, the years of subtle disrespect. It all crystallized into a moment of perfect clarity. He turned toward the stairs, intending to pack a bag and leave with whatever dignity he had left. And Michael, Catherine called after him, her voice dripping with disdain. Don't think about fighting this. You'll lose everything, and everyone will know exactly what kind of man you really are. He was halfway up the stairs when he felt hands on his back. The push was sudden, violent, and sent him tumbling down the hardwood steps. His head struck the newel post with a sickening crack, and the world went black. The last thing he heard was Catherine's voice, cold and calculating. Call 911. Tell them he was drunk and fell. Chapter 3. The Mockery. Michael drifted in and out of consciousness for 3 days. When he finally opened his eyes fully, the hospital room was sterile and white, filled with the smell of disinfectant and the steady beeping of monitors. His head felt like it had been split open, and every movement sent waves of pain through his body. Dr. Tim Summers, a kind-faced neurologist, explained the extent of his injuries. A severe concussion, 3 cracked ribs, and a fractured wrist. You're lucky to be alive, Mr. Carr. That was quite a fall. It wasn't a fall, Michael said quietly, his memory crystallizing. My wife pushed me. Dr. Summers' expression grew concerned. Mr. Carr, head injuries can sometimes cause confusion about events. Your family has been very worried about you. Your wife said you've been drinking heavily and lost your balance. I wasn't drinking. Michael's voice was weak but firm. She pushed me down the stairs. I understand you're going through a difficult divorce. Sometimes stress can. She pushed me, Michael repeated, but he could see the doubt in the doctor's eyes. Catherine had already poisoned the well, painting him as an unstable drunk. Who would believe him? Howard Perry was his first real visitor, arriving with genuine concern and a stack of documents that needed Michael's attention. Jesus, Michael, what happened? Catherine called and said you fell down the stairs drunk. I wasn't drunk, Howard. She pushed me. Michael watched his friend's face carefully. Howard studied him for a long moment, then nodded. I believe you. That woman's been circling like a vulture for months. Howard leaned closer. There's something else you need to know. Sherman's been making inquiries about the business assets, the contracts, even the equipment. They're coming for everything. Can they get the cultural center contract? Not directly, but if they force you to liquidate or sell your share of the company. Howard's expression was grim. Michael, they're not just taking half. They're trying to destroy you completely. That afternoon, Catherine arrived with Marissa and Eileen. They entered the room like they were visiting a zoo exhibit, their faces a mixture of false concern and barely concealed disgust. How are you feeling, honey? Catherine's voice was sugary sweet, loud enough for the nurses to hear. We've been so worried about your drinking problem. I don't have a drinking problem. Denial is the first sign, Eileen said with satisfaction. We've already found you a rehabilitation facility. After what happened with the children. What about the children? Marissa stepped forward, her face twisted with manufactured emotion. Dad, you scared us so much when you started yelling and throwing things. We didn't know what to do when you started drinking again. I've never had a drinking problem, and I wasn't throwing anything. The broken vase in the living room says otherwise, Catherine said smoothly, along with the hole you punched in a wall. Michael felt like he was drowning in lies. They had constructed an entire false narrative, complete with physical evidence. You did that after you pushed me down the stairs. Oh, Michael, Catherine sighed dramatically. The doctor said you might have memory problems from the fall. It's so sad to see you like this. A nurse entered to check his vitals, and Catherine immediately switched to concerned wife mode. He's been having delusions, she told the nurse quietly, accusing me of things that never happened. The doctor said this might happen with severe head trauma. After they left, Michael lay in the darkness, understanding the full scope of what they had done. It wasn't just about money. It was character assassination. They were destroying his reputation, his credibility, his very identity. By the time they were finished, no one would believe anything he said. Brandon visited alone the next day, looking conflicted and miserable. Dad, I'm sorry about what happened. Do you believe I was drunk, son? Brandon was quiet for a long time. I know you don't drink much, but Mom showed me the bottle she found in your office, and there's all this evidence. Your mother is lying, Brandon. She pushed me down those stairs because I found out about her plan to take everything in the divorce. Dad, please don't. Brandon's voice cracked. This is hard enough without you making Mom sound like some kind of monster. Michael saw the doubt in his son's eyes and knew that Catherine had poisoned him too. What did she tell you? That you've been having problems for a while. Drinking, anger, money stress. She said you've been hiding it from us, but it's been getting worse. Brandon's young face was tormented. She said you might even become violent. Brandon, I need you to think about what you know about me. In 18 years, have I ever raised my hand to anyone in this family? Have I ever come home drunk? No, but your mother has convinced you that everything you've observed for 18 years is wrong. And her version of events is right? Brandon looked torn. I don't know what to believe anymore. After his son left, Michael stared at the ceiling and felt something fundamental shift inside him. They had taken everything, his family, his reputation, his sense of self. They thought they had destroyed him completely. They were wrong. As the night wore on, Michael began to plan. He was down, but he wasn't dead. And Michael Carr hadn't built a $10 million business by giving up when things got difficult. If they wanted to play games, he would play. But he would play to win, and he would play by rules they didn't even know existed. Catherine wanted to paint him as weak and broken. Let her. She had just made the biggest mistake of her calculating life. She had underestimated him. Chapter 4, The Strategist. Michael spent 2 more days in the hospital, using the time to think and plan. When Dr. Summers finally discharged him, he didn't go to the house. Catherine had made it clear he wasn't welcome there. Instead, he checked into a modest hotel downtown and began to methodically dismantle the lies that had been built around him. His first call was to Scott Parrish, a private investigator he'd used for employee background checks. Scott was ex-military, thorough, and discreet. I need you to investigate my wife and her lawyer, Earl Sherman, Michael said when they met in the hotel's lobby. Everything. Financial records, phone records, travel, relationships, all of it. Scott studied Michael's bruised face. This about the divorce? This is about the truth. She's constructed an elaborate lie about who I am and what happened. I need evidence to prove it. Evidence can be expensive to gather. Michael handed him a check for $20,000. Get started. Next, he visited his accountant, Kurt Golden, who had managed the company's books for over a decade. Kurt's small office in Kirkland was cluttered with tax documents and financial statements. Michael, I heard about the accident. How are you feeling? It wasn't an accident, Kurt. And I need to know exactly what Catherine has access to, financially speaking. Kurt pulled up the files on his computer. Well, she's a joint account holder on most of your personal accounts, and she has signing authority on some of the business accounts. But the cultural center contract is held by the corporation, so she can't touch that directly. What about the house? Joint ownership, purchased with marital funds. In a divorce, she'd likely get half the equity. And my share of the company? Kurt's expression grew serious. That's where it gets complicated. If she can prove you're mentally unstable or unfit to run the business, she might be able to force a sale or demand operational control, which is exactly what they're trying to do. Michael leaned back in his chair. Kurt, I need you to create a new corporate structure, something that protects the core assets from divorce proceedings. Michael, That could be seen as hiding assets. It might backfire in court. I'm not hiding anything. I'm protecting my life's work from a woman who wants to destroy it out of spite. Over the next week, Michael quietly began restructuring his business empire. He created shell corporations, transferred intellectual property, and moved liquid assets into protected accounts. It was all legal, but complex enough that it would take Sherman months to unravel. Meanwhile, Scott's investigation began to bear fruit. He called Michael with the first piece of damning evidence. "Your wife's been having an affair with Earl Sherman for 8 months, Scott reported. "I've got photos, hotel receipts, phone records. But that's not the interesting part." "What's the interesting part?" "Sherman's been feeding her information about divorce strategies, asset protection, and how to build a case for spousal unfitness. They've been planning this for months, maybe longer." Michael felt a cold satisfaction. "What else?" "Your daughter's been in on it too. I've got text messages between her and your wife discussing how to make you look unstable. The whole drunk father narrative was coordinated. And my mother-in-law, Eileen Church, has been in contact with a financial planner about managing a large inheritance. Seems she's been counting on your money too." As Michael absorbed this information, he felt the last vestiges of hurt and betrayal transform into something colder and more focused. This wasn't just about greed, it was about systematic destruction. They had planned to take everything and leave him broken and discredited. Brandon called that evening, his voice hesitant. "Dad, Mom says you haven't been taking her calls." "I've been busy, son. She's worried about you. She says you're not staying at the house, and you haven't been to work." Michael almost laughed. "I'm fine, Brandon. Better than fine, actually. Dad, can we meet? I want to talk to you about what happened." They met at a small diner near Brandon's high school. His son looked older somehow, the events of the past week aging him beyond his 18 years. "Dad, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest with me." "Always." "Did you really push Mom first?" Before what happened on the stairs." Michael studied his son's face. "Brandon, in 18 years, have you ever seen me lay a hand on your mother? Ever seen me violent with anyone?" "No." "Have you ever seen me drunk?" "Not really. You have a beer sometimes, but your mother and sister have convinced you that I'm someone completely different from the man you've known your entire life?" Brandon's eyes filled with tears. "I don't know what to believe. There's all this evidence, and Mom seems so scared of you now." "Your mother isn't scared of me, son. She's scared of being caught." Michael leaned forward. "I'm going to prove everything I've told you. But I need you to be patient, and I need you to be careful. Don't let them know you're having doubts." "What do you mean?" "I mean your mother and sister have constructed an elaborate lie to steal everything I've worked for. And they're not going to stop until they've destroyed me completely." Brandon looked confused and frightened. "Dad, that sounds crazy? Paranoid? That's exactly what they want everyone to think." Michael reached across the table and took his son's hand. "Trust me just a little longer, Brandon. The truth is coming." That night, Michael sat in his hotel room and reviewed Scott's growing file of evidence. Phone records showing coordination between Catherine and Earl Sherman dating back 10 months. Financial records showing Catherine had been secretly moving money into accounts Sherman had helped her establish. Most damning of all, a recording Scott had obtained of Catherine laughing with her sister about how pathetic Michael would look when they were finished with him. But evidence alone wouldn't be enough. Catherine and her allies had positioned themselves as the victims, and Michael as the unstable aggressor. He needed to be smarter than they were, more strategic and more ruthless. He needed to become someone they never expected him to be. As he planned his next move, Michael allowed himself a small smile. They thought they had broken him, but they had actually freed him. For 18 years, he had been the dutiful husband, the patient father, the man who absorbed their disrespect because he loved them. That man was gone. In his place was someone far more dangerous, someone who had nothing left to lose and everything to gain. Chapter 5. The Gathering Storm. 3 weeks after the accident, Michael had transformed himself from victim to strategist. His temporary office was a war room of evidence, financial documents, and carefully planned countermoves. But his most important work was happening in the shadows, where Catherine couldn't see it coming. Howard Perry had become his most trusted ally, helping to secretly restructure the business while maintaining the appearance of normal operations. The new corporate framework is bulletproof, Howard reported during one of their evening meetings. Even if they force a divorce settlement, they can't touch the core assets. What about the cultural center contract? That's the beautiful part. It's held by a subsidiary that technically exists outside the marital assets. Sherman can fight it, but it'll take years and cost him more than it's worth. Michael nodded, but his mind was on bigger things than protecting assets. He was planning something far more comprehensive, a complete reversal of fortune that would expose Catherine's lies and destroy her credibility forever. The key to his plan had come from an unexpected source: Lorenzo Solomon, the project financier who had championed Michael's bid for the cultural center. Lorenzo had called personally to check on Michael after hearing about his accident. "Michael, I've been in business for 40 years, and I've learned to read people," Lorenzo had said during their lunch meeting. "Your wife visited my office last week with her lawyer, asking questions about the contract terms and payment schedules." "What kind of questions?" "The kind that suggested she thought she might be inheriting your role in the project." Lorenzo's expression was sharp. "I told her in no uncertain terms that Carr Industries means Michael Carr. No Michael, no contract." This was exactly what Michael had hoped to hear. "Lorenzo, I need to ask you something in confidence. Do you know anything about Earl Sherman's business practices?" Lorenzo's smile was predatory. "Earl Sherman has been trying to get a piece of my development projects for years. He's smooth, charming, and completely unethical." "Why?" "He's my wife's divorce attorney. And her lover." "Ah." Lorenzo leaned back in his chair. "Michael, I think you and I should have a longer conversation about Mr. Sherman." That conversation had been enlightening. Lorenzo revealed that Sherman had a history of manipulating wealthy divorce clients, often encouraging them to make extreme demands while he secretly positioned himself to benefit from the chaos. He'd been investigated twice for ethics violations and had a reputation for aggressive tactics that sometimes crossed legal lines. "The man's a predator," Lorenzo explained. "He identifies vulnerable, wealthy women going through divorces and convinces them to trust him completely. Then he systematically destroys their ex-husbands while enriching himself." "Has he ever been caught?" "Not yet. He's clever about covering his tracks. But I've seen the pattern before." This information gave Michael the final piece of his puzzle. Catherine wasn't just a greedy wife. She was the victim of a sophisticated predator who was using her greed and resentment to destroy Michael's life. Not that this excused her behavior, but it explained the elaborate nature of the deception. Michael's phone rang, interrupting his thoughts. It was Scott Parrish. "I've got something big," Scott said without preamble. "Sherman's been running this same playbook on other clients. I found 3 other cases in the past 5 years where wealthy men suffered mysterious accidents during contentious divorces, then suddenly appeared unstable and unfit. All Sherman's clients? All Sherman's clients. And in each case, he ended up in relationships with the ex-wives after the divorces were finalized. We're talking about a pattern of fraud and manipulation spanning years." Michael felt a cold thrill. "Can you prove it?" "I'm working on it. But there's more. Your wife's been talking to a reporter from Seattle Magazine about writing a story on domestic abuse among successful men. She's positioning herself as the brave victim who stood up to her powerful, abusive husband." The audacity was breathtaking. Catherine wasn't content to just steal his money. She wanted to destroy his reputation publicly, making him a poster child for domestic abuse among Seattle's business community. "Scott, I need you to accelerate your investigation, whatever it costs." "Already on it. I've got a contact at the State Bar Association who's very interested in Mr. Sherman's pattern of behavior." That evening, Michael drove past his old house for the first time since the attack. Through the windows, he could see Catherine hosting what looked like a dinner party. Her guests included several prominent Seattle socialites, likely there to hear her tale of victimhood and escape from her abusive husband. As he watched, Earl Sherman's Mercedes pulled into the driveway. The man himself emerged, tall, silver-haired, and radiating the kind of smooth confidence that impressed people who didn't look too closely. Sherman kissed Catherine openly on the front porch, making no effort to hide their relationship. They were flaunting their victory, confident that Michael was broken and defeated. Catherine was already living the life she wanted, playing the role of the brave survivor while enjoying the fruits of her deception. Michael's phone buzzed with a text from Brandon. "Dad, can you call me? It's important." He dialed his son's number, hoping that Brandon had finally seen through his mother's lies. "Dad, where are you?" Brandon's voice was urgent. "Why?" "Mom's having a party, and she's telling everyone how you threatened to kill her before you fell downstairs. She's saying you've been calling and leaving threatening messages." Michael's blood ran cold. "I haven't called her once, Brandon." "I know. I've been with you when you got your messages." But she played recordings for everyone. They sounded like your voice. The recordings were fake, of course. With modern technology, it was possible to synthesize anyone's voice with enough samples. Sherman had probably used Michael's voicemails and business recordings to create threatening messages that never existed. "Brandon, you need to get out of that house. Can you come stay with me?" I don't know, Dad. Everyone's saying you're dangerous now. Mom's friends are talking about getting restraining orders." Michael realized that Catherine and Sherman had just escalated their campaign beyond financial destruction. They were now positioning him as a physical threat, laying the groundwork for criminal charges. "Brandon, listen to me carefully. Your mother and Earl Sherman are framing me. The recordings are fake, the evidence is manufactured, and they're planning to have me arrested." "Dad, I know how it sounds. But in about 2 weeks, I'm going to prove everything I've told you. Until then, stay safe, keep your eyes open, and remember that the man you've known for 18 years hasn't changed." After hanging up, Michael sat in his car and stared at the house he'd built, now occupied by enemies who were systematically destroying everything he'd ever cared about. They thought they were winning, and by traditional measures, they were. But Michael had learned something important about himself in the past month. He wasn't traditional anymore. The dutiful, patient man who had absorbed their disrespect for years was gone. In his place was someone harder, smarter, and far more dangerous than they could imagine. Catherine wanted to play victim. Sherman wanted to destroy men's lives for profit. They were about to learn what happened when they targeted someone who refused to stay down. The real game was just beginning. Chapter 6. The Trap Springs. The trap Michael had been setting for 6 weeks finally sprung on a gray Tuesday morning in November. He was in his temporary office when Scott Parrish called with news that would change everything. "The State Bar investigation has gone criminal," Scott announced. "The FBI is taking over the Earl Sherman case. Turns out, he's been running a wire fraud scheme across multiple states." Michael leaned forward. "Wire fraud? He's been using fake evidence, manipulated recordings, and falsified documents to defraud divorce settlements. We're talking about millions of dollars stolen from men across the Pacific Northwest over the past decade. And Catherine, she's what they call a co-conspirator. The FBI has been monitoring her communications for 2 weeks. They know about the fake recordings, the planted evidence, even the coordinated character assassination." Michael felt a surge of vindication mixed with cold satisfaction. "When do they move?" "Today. Federal agents are executing search warrants on Sherman's office and your house as we speak." Even as Scott spoke, Michael's phone was ringing. It was Brandon, his voice panicked and confused. "Dad, there are FBI agents at the house. They're arresting Mom and Earl Sherman." "Where are you, son?" "At school." "But Dad, what's happening?" "Mom called screaming about how you somehow framed them, but that doesn't make sense." "Brandon, I need you to come to my office. It's time you learned the truth about what your mother and Sherman have been doing." An hour later, Brandon sat in stunned silence as Michael and Howard laid out the evidence. Financial records showing Sherman's pattern of fraud. Phone recordings revealing the coordination between Catherine and Sherman. FBI documents detailing their wire fraud investigation. "She really pushed you down the stairs?" Brandon asked, his voice small. "She really did. And then she and Sherman constructed an elaborate lie to make me look like the criminal." Brandon was crying now, the weight of his mother's deception finally hitting him. "Dad, I'm so sorry. I believed her. I thought you had changed, that you'd become someone different." Michael pulled his son into a hug. "You believed what any reasonable person would believe. They were very convincing. What happens now? Now we wait for justice to run its course. The waiting didn't take long. By that afternoon, news of the arrest was spreading through Seattle's business community. Earl Sherman, prominent divorce attorney, arrested for federal wire fraud. Catherine Carr, socialite and domestic abuse survivor, charged as his co-conspirator. Michael's phone rang constantly, reporters wanting comments, business associates expressing shock, friends offering support. He answered none of them. This wasn't about public vindication. It was about something much more fundamental. Lorenzo Solomon called personally. "Michael, I just heard the news. I can't say I'm surprised about Sherman, but your wife. She's not my wife anymore, Lorenzo. The divorce papers were finalized yesterday." "Well then, congratulations on your freedom." "And Michael? The Cultural Center Board would like to discuss expanding your contract. We're impressed by how you've handled this situation." That evening, Michael finally returned to his house. His house now, since Catherine's arrest had voided any claim she might have had to it. The FBI had finished their search, leaving everything meticulously organized, but somehow foreign. This place had been the scene of so much deception that it no longer felt like home. He was packing up Catherine's belongings when Marissa arrived. His daughter looked haggard and defiant, her usual entitled confidence replaced by desperation. "Dad, you have to help her," Marissa pleaded. "Mom's in federal prison. They're saying she could get 20 years. Michael continued folding Catherine's clothes. "Your mother made her choices, Marissa. You planned this. You set her up. I documented her crimes. There's a difference. She loved Earl. She was trying to start a new life." Michael finally looked at his daughter, really looked at her. At 20, she had Catherine's beauty, but none of her intelligence. She'd been raised to believe that her wants and desires were more important than other people's rights, and now she was facing the consequences of that worldview. "Marissa, your mother didn't love Earl Sherman. She was a mark in his fraud scheme. He's been running this same con on wealthy women for years." "That's not true. It's all documented. Sherman identified your mother as a target, manipulated her resentment toward me, and convinced her to participate in a criminal conspiracy. She thought she was clever, but she was just another victim." Marissa collapsed into a chair, the reality finally sinking in. But the recordings, the evidence, all fake, manufactured by Sherman to support their fraud case. "What about when she pushed you down the stairs?" Michael turned to face his daughter fully. "That was real, Marissa. Your mother attempted to seriously injure me, possibly kill me, to support her lie. And you helped her cover it up. I didn't know. You knew I wasn't drunk. You knew I don't have anger problems. You knew the story didn't make sense. But you participated anyway because it benefited you." Marissa was crying now, but Michael felt no sympathy. She had been a willing participant in his destruction, motivated by greed and entitlement. "What happens to me?" she asked. "That's up to you. You're an adult, Marissa. You can finish college, get a job, build a real life. Or you can continue believing that the world owes you something and end up like your mother. Will you help me with tuition?" The question revealed everything about his daughter's character. Even now, facing the collapse of her mother's criminal scheme, she was thinking about money. "No," Michael said simply. "You're on your own." After Marissa left, Michael sat in his quiet house and reflected on the past 2 months. Catherine was facing federal charges that would likely result in significant prison time. Earl Sherman was looking at decades behind bars. Marissa would have to learn to support herself for the first time in her life. And Michael? He was free. Free from the lies, the manipulation, the constant undermining of his self-worth. Free to build whatever life he wanted with people who actually valued him. His phone rang. It was Brandon. "Dad, I saw the news reports. Is it really over?" "It's really over, son. Can I come home?" Michael smiled for the first time in months. "Of course. This is your home, too." As he waited for Brandon to arrive, Michael walked through the house he'd built with his own hands. Tomorrow, he would start the process of truly making it his own again. New furniture, new art, new memories that weren't tainted by deception and betrayal. But tonight, he would simply enjoy the silence of victory. Chapter 7. The Reckoning. 6 months after Catherine's arrest, Michael stood in the courthouse lobby watching his ex-wife being led away in handcuffs. The federal judge had just sentenced her to 8 years in prison for wire fraud, conspiracy, and filing false police reports. Earl Sherman had received 15 years, his longer sentence reflecting his role as the mastermind of the operation. Catherine looked older, her blonde hair now showing gray roots, her designer clothes replaced by an orange jumpsuit. As she passed Michael, she stopped and stared at him with pure hatred. "You destroyed my life," she hissed. "You destroyed your own life," Michael replied calmly. "I just documented it. I could have made you happy, Michael. We could have had everything." "We did have everything, Catherine. You threw it away because you wanted someone else's version of everything." As the guards led her away, Catherine's composure finally cracked. "This isn't over," she screamed. "When I get out, I'll make you pay for what you've done." Michael felt nothing as she disappeared into the corridor. No satisfaction, no regret, no anger. Just the quiet relief of a man who had finally closed a painful chapter of his life. Outside the courthouse, a small crowd of reporters waited. Michael had avoided media attention throughout the trial, but today he had something to say. "Mr. Carr," called Rob Sharp from Seattle Business Journal, "how do you feel about your ex-wife's sentence?" "I feel that justice has been served," Michael replied. "Not just for me, but for all of Earl Sherman's victims over the years." "Do you have any comment about the civil lawsuits filed by Sherman's other victims?" "I support their efforts to recover what was stolen from them. Mr. Sherman's criminal enterprise destroyed many lives, and his victims deserve compensation." "What's next for you in Carr Industries?" Michael allowed himself a small smile. "We're building the future." That was literally true. The Cultural Center project had not only proceeded on schedule, but had expanded into a multi-phase development worth over $50 million. Michael's reputation, far from being damaged by Catherine's accusations, had been enhanced by his graceful handling of the crisis. More importantly, he had learned who his real friends were. Howard Perry had proven to be unshakably loyal. Lorenzo Solomon had become not just a business partner, but a trusted advisor. Even some of Catherine's former friends had reached out to apologize for believing her lies. Brandon had moved back home permanently, his relationship with his father stronger than ever. The experience had matured him, teaching him valuable lessons about integrity, loyalty, and the consequences of choosing the wrong side. "Dad," Brandon had said one evening as they worked together in Michael's workshop, "I'm sorry I doubted you. You were 18 years old, and your mother was very convincing. Don't apologize for believing the people who were supposed to love you. But I should have known better. I lived with you my whole life. I knew what kind of man you were." Michael had set down his tools and looked at his son. "Brandon, the important thing isn't that you believed her initially. The important thing is that you were willing to reconsider when the evidence changed. That's the mark of a good man." Marissa had not fared as well. Cut off from family financial support, she had initially tried to maintain her expensive lifestyle through credit cards and loans. When that proved unsustainable, she had dropped out of Stanford and moved in with Eileen Church, who blamed Michael for Catherine's downfall. "She's struggling," Brandon reported after one of his rare contacts with his sister. "Grandma Eileen is bitter and angry all the time, and Marissa's working as a waitress. She keeps saying it's all your fault. What do you think?" Michael asked. "I think she chose to participate in Mom's lies because it benefited her. Now she's dealing with the consequences." Michael had offered Marissa one chance at reconciliation, a genuine apology and acknowledgement of her role in the deception, followed by a commitment to rebuilding their relationship honestly. She had refused, clinging to the narrative that she and Catherine were victims of Michael's revenge. Some people, Howard had observed, would rather be bitter than wrong. On the anniversary of his accident, Michael hosted a dinner party at his house. The guest list included Howard and his wife, Lorenzo and his partner, Dr. Tim Summers, Scott Parrish, and several other people who had supported him through the crisis. Brandon was there too, now a freshman at the University of Washington studying engineering. As they raised their glasses in a toast, Michael reflected on how much had changed. This house, once filled with tension and lies, was now a place of warmth and honesty. These people, unlike his former family, valued him for who he was rather than what he could provide. To second chances, Lorenzo proposed. To real friends, Howard added, To the truth, Michael concluded. Later that evening, as the guests departed and Brandon headed upstairs to study, Michael walked out onto his deck and looked at the Seattle skyline. Somewhere out there, Catherine was beginning her 8th year in federal prison, still refusing to accept responsibility for her choices. Marissa was struggling with a life that required actual effort and integrity. Earl Sherman was appealing his sentence, while other victims continued to come forward. But Michael was finally truly free. Free from people who saw him as a means to an end. Free from relationships built on obligation rather than affection. Free to choose his own path forward. His phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. "Mr. Carr, this is Kelsey Hayes from Portland Architecture. Lorenzo Solomon suggested I reach out about a potential project. Would you be available for a call this week?" Michael smiled. New opportunities, new relationships, new possibilities. The future was unwritten, and for the first time in years, he was the only one holding the pen. As he headed inside, Michael caught his reflection in the window. The man looking back at him was leaner, more confident, more at peace than the one who had signed that contract 18 months ago. That man had been successful, but not truly powerful. This man was both. Catherine had wanted to destroy him, but she had actually freed him. In trying to take everything, she had forced him to discover what really mattered. In attempting to break him, she had helped him become unbreakable. Chapter 8. The Phoenix. 18 months after the trial, Michael stood in the completed cultural center, watching as Seattle's elite gathered for the grand opening gala. The building was a masterpiece of modern architecture, all gleaming glass and flowing lines, filled with galleries, performance spaces, and educational facilities that would serve the community for generations. "Michael, this is incredible," said Mercedes Atkins, the center's new director. "You've created something truly special here." Michael nodded, accepting the praise with quiet satisfaction. The project had come in under budget and ahead of schedule, establishing Carr Industries as one of the premier construction firms in the Pacific Northwest. More importantly, it represented his complete renaissance, from the broken man Catherine had tried to create to someone stronger and more successful than he'd ever been. The evening's guest list read like a who's who of Seattle society. Politicians, business leaders, artists, and philanthropists mingled throughout the soaring spaces, many of them the same people who had once whispered about Michael's drinking problem and anger issues. Now, they competed to shake his hand and express their admiration for his vision. Michael, Lorenzo Solomon approached with an elegant woman in her 40s. "I'd like you to meet Dr. Teresa Blanchard. She's the new head of the University of Washington's Architecture Department." Michael shook hands with Dr. Blanchard, immediately impressed by her intelligence and warmth. "Dr. Blanchard, welcome to Seattle. Please call me Teresa. And thank you for creating this wonderful space. I understand you designed many of the innovative features yourself." "I had some ideas," Michael said modestly, "but the real credit goes to the team." "Nonsense," Lorenzo interjected. "Michael's been studying architecture and design for years. This project was his vision from start to finish." As they talked, Michael found himself genuinely enjoying the conversation. Teresa was brilliant, accomplished, and refreshingly direct, qualities he'd learned to value after years of Catherine's manipulation and games. When she mentioned her interest in sustainable construction techniques, they discovered a shared passion for environmental responsibility in building design. "Would you be interested in guest lecturing for my students?" Teresa asked. "They could learn so much from someone who's actually implementing these concepts at scale." "I'd be honored," Michael replied, and meant it. Across the room, he spotted Brandon in conversation with several young professionals. His son had grown into a confident, principled young man, and watching him navigate the social dynamics with integrity made Michael proud. Brandon caught his eye and smiled, giving a subtle thumbs up that made Michael chuckle. The evening's program included speeches from city officials and cultural leaders, but the highlight was a surprise announcement from Mayor Bradford. "Ladies and gentlemen, I'm pleased to inform you that the City of Seattle has awarded the contract for our new waterfront development to Carr Industries. This $100 million project will transform our downtown core and create thousands of jobs." The applause was thunderous, But Michael felt it as more than just professional recognition. It was vindication, proof that his reputation and integrity had not only survived Catherine's attack, but had grown stronger because of it. Later, as the crowd began to thin, Howard Perry joined Michael on the center's rooftop terrace, looking out over the city lights. "Hell of a night, boss," Howard said, raising his champagne glass. "Remember when you were sitting in that hospital bed, and Catherine was telling everyone you were a drunk and a failure?" "I remember," Michael said quietly. "What do you think she'd say if she could see this?" Michael considered the question. Catherine was currently serving her sentence at a federal facility in Oregon, reportedly spending her time filing frivolous appeals and maintaining her innocence. According to Brandon, who received occasional letters, she remained convinced that Michael had somehow framed her and that she was the victim of a vast conspiracy. "I think she'd find a way to make it about her," Michael said finally. "Some people can't accept responsibility for their choices, no matter how obvious the consequences become." And Marissa? Michael's expression grew sadder. His daughter had eventually found stable employment at a marketing firm in Portland, but their relationship remained broken. She still blamed him for destroying the family and refused to acknowledge her role in Catherine's deception. Unlike Catherine, who was genuinely malicious, Marissa seemed more willfully blind than evil, but the result was the same. "Marissa made her choice," Michael said. "I've left the door open if she ever wants to rebuild our relationship, but it has to be based on truth and mutual respect. That's all you can do." As Howard headed home, Michael remained on the terrace, enjoying the quiet after the evening's excitement. He was no longer the same man who had signed that $10 million contract 2 years ago. That man had been successful but naive, accomplished but too trusting, strong but not yet tempered by real adversity. This man was different. He had learned to recognize manipulation, to value authenticity over appearance, to distinguish between people who loved him and people who loved what he could provide. He had discovered that true strength came not from avoiding conflict, but from surviving it with integrity intact. His phone buzzed with a text from Teresa. "Thank you for a wonderful evening. I'm looking forward to that guest lecture and to continuing our conversation about sustainable design. Perhaps over dinner sometime." Michael smiled and typed back, "I'd like that very much." As he prepared to leave, Michael took one last look around the cultural center. Every beam, every window, every carefully planned space represented not just his professional skill, but his personal journey from victimhood to victory. Catherine had tried to take everything from him, but in the end, she had given him something invaluable: the knowledge of who he really was when everything else was stripped away. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities, new relationships built on solid foundations rather than convenient lies. The waterfront project would be his biggest undertaking yet, and teaching at the university would open new intellectual horizons. But tonight, Michael Carr stood in the building he had created and felt something he hadn't experienced in years of marriage to Catherine: complete contentment with the life he had built and excitement about the future he was creating. The phoenix had risen from the ashes, and it was beautiful. Chapter 9. The Final Victory. 2 years later, Michael stood in the same hospital room where his journey had begun, but this time he was there as a visitor, not a patient. Dr. Tim Summers had asked him to speak with another patient, a successful businessman whose wife had recently pushed him down a flight of stairs and was now claiming he had fallen while drunk. "His name is Cody Hodges," Dr. Summers explained as they walked down the corridor. "Same pattern you experienced. Wife files for divorce. Husband has accident. Suddenly everyone believes he's unstable and dangerous." Michael nodded grimly. Even after Earl Sherman's conviction and imprisonment, his methods had apparently spread to other predatory lawyers. "How can I help?" "He doesn't believe anyone will take his word against his wife's. He's convinced his life is over." Michael entered the room where a man roughly his age lay with bandages around his head, staring at the ceiling with the same hopeless expression Michael remembered feeling in this very place. "Mr. Hodges? I'm Michael Carr. I think we need to talk." Over the next hour, Michael shared his story: the betrayal, the systematic character assassination, the careful documentation of evidence, and, ultimately, the complete vindication. As he spoke, he watched Cody's expression change from despair to amazement to determination. "You're telling me this can be beaten?" Cody asked. "I'm telling you that truth has a way of surfacing, but only if you're smart about how you handle it." Michael handed him Scott Parrish's business card. "This investigator helped me gather evidence. More importantly, don't do what I almost did. Don't try to fight this alone." When Michael left the hospital, he felt a familiar sense of purpose. Over the past 2 years, he had quietly helped several men in similar situations, providing resources, recommendations, and most importantly, hope. Word had spread through certain circles that Michael Carr was someone who understood these particular battles and knew how to win them. His phone rang as he walked to his car. It was Brandon, now in his senior year and engaged to a wonderful young woman named Lee Holt, whom he'd met in his engineering program. "Dad, great news. Lee and I just got approval for the summer internship program at Carr Industries." Michael smiled. The internship program was his way of giving back to young people who shared his values of hard work and integrity. "That's fantastic, son. Your mother would be proud." They were referring to Teresa, whom Michael had married 6 months earlier in a small ceremony, surrounded by people who genuinely cared about them both. The relationship had developed slowly and organically, built on mutual respect, shared interests, and authentic affection. Everything his marriage to Catherine had lacked. Speaking of Teresa, is she still planning the sustainability conference at the university? Next month, we're expecting attendees from across the country. It's going to showcase the Waterfront Project as a model for environmentally responsible urban development. The Waterfront Project had been completed 3 months ahead of schedule and had won multiple awards for innovation and environmental stewardship. More importantly, it had cemented Michael's reputation as one of the most visionary builders in the region, leading to opportunities across the West Coast. "Dad, there's something else," Brandon said, his tone becoming more serious. "I got a letter from Marissa." Michael felt the familiar tightness in his chest. Despite his success and happiness, his estrangement from his daughter remained a source of pain. "What did she say?" "She's engaged to someone named Ron Sprague, a lawyer in Portland. She wanted me to tell you that she's sorry for what happened and that she hopes someday you can forgive her." Michael pulled over to process this news. After 4 years of silence and hostility, Marissa was finally acknowledging her role in the deception. "What do you think?" "I think she's grown up," Brandon said carefully. Her fiancé apparently helped her understand what really happened back then. She's not asking for money or anything, just forgiveness. "What did you tell her?" "I told her she should call you herself." That evening, Michael was working in his home office when the call came. Marissa's voice was tentative, uncertain, but noticeably more mature than he remembered. "Dad, it's Marissa," Brandon said. "Brandon said you might be willing to talk." "I'm always willing to talk, sweetheart. The question is whether you're willing to be honest." There was a long pause, and then Marissa began to cry. "Dad, I was so stupid, so selfish. I knew you weren't drunk that night. I knew Mom was lying about so many things. But I went along with it because I thought it would benefit me." "Why are you calling now, Marissa?" "Because Ron helped me understand what a terrible person I was being. He made me see that I had helped destroy an innocent man, my own father, for money. Dad, I've been sick about it for years." Michael felt his anger beginning to dissolve. "Are you calling because you want something, or because you want to make amends?" "I want to make amends. I don't expect you to forgive me right away, or maybe ever. But I needed you to." They talked for over an hour, and Michael heard something in his daughter's voice that had been missing for years: genuine remorse and authentic humility. By the end of the conversation, they had agreed to meet for coffee the following weekend. "Dad," Marissa said before hanging up, "I heard about your wedding to Dr. Blanchard. I'm happy for you. You deserve someone who appreciates you." After the call, Michael sat in his office, surrounded by the awards, photographs, and mementos of his rebuilt life. On his desk was a family photo from Brandon's graduation, showing Michael, Teresa, Brandon, and Lee laughing together at dinner. On the wall was a framed newspaper article about the Cultural Center, with the headline "From Ashes to Architecture, the Michael Carr Renaissance." Teresa appeared in the doorway, wearing one of his old work shirts and carrying 2 cups of tea. How did it go with Marissa? Better than I expected. She's grown up. Teresa settled into the chair across from his desk, studying his face with the perceptive gaze he'd learned to love. Are you going to forgive her? I think I already have. Forgiveness isn't about forgetting what happened. It's about choosing not to let the past control your future. Very wise, Professor Carr, Teresa said with a smile, referring to his new title at the university. As they sat together in comfortable silence, Michael reflected on the extraordinary journey that had brought him to this point. 5 years ago, he had been a successful but unappreciated man trapped in a loveless marriage. Catherine's betrayal had nearly destroyed him, but had also freed him to become someone better. He now had a wife who respected his intelligence and valued his character. He had a son who admired him and had grown into an exceptional young man. He might soon have his daughter back, and if not, he had peace with that possibility. He had built a business empire based on integrity and innovation. He had created buildings that would outlast him and had helped other men escape similar traps. Most importantly, he had learned to distinguish between people who loved him and people who used him, between relationships built on mutual respect and those based on convenience or obligation. His phone chimed with a text from Lorenzo. Michael, just heard from the mayor's office. They want to discuss the new airport terminal project. Are you interested in another $100 million challenge? Michael looked at Teresa, who raised her eyebrows and grinned. What do you think, Professor? Ready for your next adventure? With you? Always. As they turned off the lights and headed upstairs, Michael caught sight of himself in the hallway mirror. The man looking back was confident, successful, and genuinely happy. Everything Catherine had tried to prevent him from becoming. In seeking to destroy him, she had inadvertently created the best version of himself. Outside, Seattle sparkled in the darkness, its skyline now including several buildings that bore his architectural signature. Tomorrow would bring new projects, new challenges, new opportunities to build something lasting and beautiful. But tonight, Michael Carr was exactly where he belonged, surrounded by people who loved him for who he was, not what he could provide, in a home filled with truth instead of lies, planning a future limited only by his imagination and integrity. Catherine had wanted to break him. Instead, she had made him unbreakable. And that, Michael knew, was the sweetest victory of all. And there you have it. Another story comes to an end. What did you think? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoy this story, consider joining our community by subscribing. It means the world to us. For more stories like this one, check out the recommended videos on screen. And I'll see you there. Welcome back to another story on Infidelity Tales Lab. Before we begin, tell us, where in the world are you watching from? Now, let's dive into today's story. Chapter 1. The Homecoming. The autumn wind cut through the mountains of West Virginia like a knife, carrying with it the scent of dying leaves and distant wood smoke. Roman McKinney stood on the porch of his childhood home, his weathered hands gripping a cup of black coffee that had long since gone cold. 3 tours in Afghanistan had taught him to read the silence between sounds, and something in the air tonight felt wrong. Roman had built his life on discipline and loyalty. At 42, he was a decorated Special Forces operator with 20 years of service behind him. His body bore the scars of countless missions, a jagged line across his left shoulder from Kandahar, shrapnel marks on his forearms from Helmand Province. But the deepest wounds were invisible, carved by betrayal closer to home than any battlefield. The phone call had come 2 hours ago, pulling him from his temporary quarters at Fort Bragg, where he'd been preparing for his final deployment before retirement. Roman? This is Sheriff Saul Barr from Millfield County. The voice had been familiar. Saul had been 3 years ahead of Roman in high school, a linebacker who'd gone into law enforcement instead of the military. They'd shared beers and war stories whenever Roman came home on leave. Soldier, we found your son's jacket by the old reservoir. Your wife claimed he ran away. The pause that followed had stretched like a taut wire. But a hunter saw her and her boyfriend drive him out there and leave him. It's getting cold. Roman's jaw had tightened, his free hand unconsciously forming a fist. Luke McKinney was only 14, a quiet boy with his father's dark eyes and his mother's stubborn streak. The idea of Regina, his wife of 16 years, abandoning their son in the wilderness was incomprehensible. "I'm telling the press he's a missing person," Saul had continued, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "Her boyfriend is at the sawmill bar. You could teach him a lesson in your own style." Now, standing in the growing darkness, Roman replayed every word. Regina had been distant during his last leave 6 months ago, distracted and cold in ways that went beyond the usual strain of military marriages. She'd claimed it was stress from her job at the local insurance office, but Roman's instincts, honed by years of combat, had detected deception. He pulled out his phone and scrolled through the photos of Luke. Fishing trips to Seneca Creek, hunting expeditions in the Monongahela forest, quiet moments reading together on this very porch. The boy was everything to Roman, the future he'd been fighting to protect, the reason he'd endured 3 deployments in a decade. Roman's phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. "Your boy's tough." Found him half frozen by Miller's Cave. "He's safe. S.B." Relief flooded through him, followed immediately by rage. Regina hadn't just betrayed their marriage, she'd endangered their child. The woman he'd loved since high school, the one he'd married in the little chapel on Maple Street, had crossed a line from which there could be no return. He walked back into the house, his footsteps echoing in the empty rooms. The McKinney family had owned this property for 3 generations. Roman's grandfather had built the main structure in 1952, a solid 2-story frame house with a wraparound porch and a view of the valley below. Roman's father had added the workshop and garage, teaching his son the value of working with his hands between deployments to Korea and Vietnam. Roman made his way to the basement, where his father's gun safe stood in the corner like a metal monument to preparedness. Inside were the tools of his trade: a Remington 700 sniper rifle, a modified AR-15, 2 Glock pistols, and various other implements acquired over 2 decades of service. But tonight, he reached for something simpler, a tactical knife his unit had given him after his second tour, engraved with the Special Forces motto, De Oppresso Liber, to liberate the oppressed. He'd spent years liberating strangers from tyranny. Now it was time to liberate himself from betrayal. Roman's phone rang again. This time, the caller ID showed Regina McKinney. "Where are you?" Her voice was sharp with false concern. "Luke's missing. We need to—" "I know." Roman's voice was flat, emotionless. "I'm coming home. Roman, He ended the call and turned off the phone. Whatever Regina McKinney had to say, she could save it for the reckoning that was coming. Chapter 2. The Unraveling. The drive from West Virginia to Millfield took Roman through winding mountain roads he'd traveled countless times as a boy. Each turn brought back memories. Summers spent hunting with his father, fishing trips with his grandfather, high school dates with Regina before the world got complicated. But tonight, the familiar landscape felt foreign, tainted by the knowledge of what waited at the end of the journey. Roman's mind worked like a tactical computer, processing information and formulating plans. He'd learned long ago that successful operations required intelligence, patience, and the will to see things through to their logical conclusion. Emotion was a luxury he couldn't afford, not when his son's safety hung in the balance. He pulled into the parking lot of Murphy's Diner, a 24-hour truck stop where he'd worked summers during high school. The neon sign flickered against the night sky, casting red and blue shadows across the pavement. Inside, he spotted a familiar figure hunched over a cup of coffee in a corner booth. Sheriff Saul Barr looked up as Roman approached. At 45, Saul had the weathered face of a man who'd seen too much small-town darkness. His uniform was rumpled, his badge reflecting the diner's fluorescent lights. "Roman." Saul stood and extended his hand. "Good to see you, though I wish it was under different circumstances." They sat across from each other, 2 middle-aged men bound by shared history and mutual respect. The waitress, a tired-looking woman in her 50s, brought Roman coffee without being asked. "Tell me everything," Roman said. Saul pulled out a small notebook, flipping through pages covered in his careful handwriting. "Hunter named Chester Durham, ironic considering, found Luke around midnight near Miller's Cave. Kid was hypothermic, scared out of his mind. Durham brought him to the hospital, where Dr. Cora Ortega treated him for exposure. Roman's hands tightened around his coffee cup. Chester Durham, Regina's boyfriend. Saul's voice carried the weight of distaste. Been seeing him for about 4 months, according to local gossip. He works part-time at the sawmill, part-time as a hunting guide. Real piece of work, 2 DUIs, history of domestic violence with his ex-wife. The irony wasn't lost on Roman. The man who'd found Luke was apparently the same man who'd helped abandon him. Either Chester Durham had a sudden attack of conscience, or something more complicated was at play. What's Luke saying? Saul's expression darkened. Not much. He's traumatized, Roman. Keeps asking for you. Won't say a word about how he ended up out there. Dr. Ortega says he's physically fine, but psychologically. He shrugged. Kid needs his father. Where is he now? Safe house. My sister Teresa runs a youth shelter 2 counties over. I figure it was better than leaving him with Regina, considering. Roman nodded, grateful for his old friend's foresight. And Regina, playing the concerned mother for the cameras. Local news picked up the story. Military father returns to search for missing son. She's got the whole town convinced you're some kind of absentee father who abandoned his family for the war. The familiar burn of injustice rose in Roman's chest. He'd given 16 years to his country, missing birthdays and holidays and school plays to serve something larger than himself. Now Regina was using his sacrifice as a weapon against him. There's more, Saul continued. I did some digging on Durham. He's not just some random drifter. Turns out he's Regina's cousin. Second cousin, but still family. They've known each other since childhood. This information shifted everything. Roman had assumed Regina's affair was a recent development, born of loneliness and poor judgment. But if she had history with Durham, if this betrayal had deeper roots, met his friend's gaze steadily. I'm not planning to disappear anyone, Saul. I'm planning to expose the truth. And how exactly do you intend to do that? Roman smiled, but there was no warmth in it. The same way I've handled every mission for the past 20 years. Carefully. Chapter 3, Reconnaissance. The McKinney house sat on 5 acres of wooded land outside Millfield's town limits, a 2-story colonial that Roman had bought with his deployment bonuses and VA loan benefits. As he pulled into the gravel driveway, he could see Regina's car, a red Honda Civic he'd given her for their 10th anniversary, parked beside a black pickup truck he didn't recognize. Roman sat in his truck for a moment, studying the scene like a sniper calculating wind speed and distance. The house looked the same from the outside. White vinyl siding, green shutters, the tire swing he'd hung from the old oak tree for Luke's 8th birthday. But knowing what he knew now, it felt like enemy territory. He approached the front door with practiced silence, his military training allowing him to move without disturbing the dried leaves scattered across the porch. Through the living room window, he could hear voices, Regina's soprano mixed with a deeper male tone he assumed belonged to Chester Durham. Told you this would happen, Regina was saying, her voice tight with stress. I told you he'd come back, and now look at the mess we're in. Relax, Reggie. Durham's voice carried the lazy confidence of a man who'd never faced real consequences. Your husband's been gone for months. What's he going to do, anyway? File for divorce? You'll get half of everything, plus alimony and child support. Roman pressed himself against the wall beside the window, using techniques he'd learned for urban reconnaissance. From this angle, he could see into the living room without being spotted. Regina McKinney stood by the fireplace, still beautiful at 38, but harder somehow. Her blonde hair shorter than Roman remembered, and her clothes more expensive than their budget should have allowed. Chester Durham lounged on the couch Roman had bought last Christmas, a big man with prematurely gray hair and the soft look of someone who'd never pushed himself beyond comfort. You don't understand, Regina said, pacing like a caged animal. Roman's not like other men. He's intense, focused. When he sets his mind to something, he doesn't let go. Durham laughed, a sound devoid of humor. What's he going to do? He's a soldier, not a detective. Besides, Luke can't prove anything. Kid was half frozen when I found him. Probably doesn't even remember how he got there. Roman's blood turned to ice. Durham had been the one to find Luke, but from the conversation, it sounded like he'd also been involved in abandoning him. The man was playing both sides, the concerned citizen who'd rescued the boy and the conspirator who'd helped endanger him in the first place. That's not the point, Regina snapped. The point is that Roman will start asking questions, and when he does, we stick to the story. Luke ran away because he was upset about his parents' marriage falling apart. You searched for him, called the police, played the worried mother. Durham found him during a hunting trip and brought him to safety. End of story. Regina shook her head. You don't know him like I do. Roman's smart, Chester. Smarter than both of us put together. If he suspects something, then we'll deal with it. Durham stood and moved toward Regina, his hands settling on her shoulders in a gesture that was meant to be comforting but looked possessive to Roman's trained eye. Look, we've come too far to back down now. The insurance policy alone will set us up for life. Insurance policy. Roman's mind raced, connecting dots he hadn't even known existed. Regina worked for Millfield Insurance, had worked there for 8 years, handling claims and policies for half the county. What kind of insurance policy were they talking about? The accidental death benefit is $500,000, Regina said, her voice dropping to a whisper. But only if it looks like an accident. If there's any suspicion, any investigation, Roman's world tilted on its axis. They weren't just talking about divorce or even abandoning Luke in the wilderness. They were planning to kill him, to make it look like an accident and collect on his life insurance policy. The hunting trip is perfect, Durham continued. Tragic accident in the mountains, experienced soldier caught off guard by the weather. It happens all the time. And Luke, Durham shrugged. Kid will be traumatized by losing his father so soon after getting lost. Natural that he'd want to stay with his mother instead of being shipped off to some relative he barely knows. Roman had heard enough. He backed away from the window with the same silent precision he'd used to approach, his mind already formulating a plan. Regina and Durham thought they were setting a trap for him, but they'd just revealed their hand to the one person capable of turning their scheme against them. As he reached his truck, Roman's phone buzzed with a text message. The number was local, but not in his contacts. Your wife's planning something. Meet me at the old covered bridge tomorrow at noon. Come alone. A friend. Roman stared at the message for a long moment before deleting it. In his experience, anonymous tips were either traps or desperate cries for help. Either way, they required careful investigation. He started the engine and pulled out of the driveway, his headlights sweeping across the house where he'd once believed he had a future. That man, the one who'd trusted blindly and loved completely, was dead. What remained was a soldier with a mission, to protect his son and make his enemies pay for their betrayal. The war had finally come home. Chapter 4. The Network. Roman spent the night in a motel on the outskirts of Millfield, a rundown establishment that catered to truckers and travelers who valued anonymity over comfort. He'd checked in under the name John Frederick, one of several false identities he developed during his intelligence training, and paid cash for a week in advance. The room was spartiate but functional. A single bed, a small table, and a bathroom with fixtures that had seen better decades. Roman didn't need luxury. He needed a base of operations where he could plan without interference. He spread Luke's school photos across the table, studying his son's face for clues he might have missed. In the most recent picture, taken just before Roman's deployment 8 months ago, Luke's smile seemed forced, his eyes holding a wariness that hadn't been there before. How long had Regina been planning this? How long had his son been living in a house where his mother and her lover discussed murdering his father? At 0600 hours, Roman drove to the covered bridge mentioned in the mysterious text message. The structure dated to the 1890s, a wooden span that crossed Seneca Creek at its narrowest point. Local legend claimed it was haunted by the ghost of a Civil War soldier. Though Roman had never seen anything more supernatural than teenagers drinking beer and carving their initials into the weathered planks. He arrived early, positioning himself in the tree-line with a clear view of both approaches to the bridge. Military training had taught him that meetings with unknown parties required preparation and multiple exit strategies. At exactly noon, a figure emerged from the opposite end of the bridge. Roman recognized her immediately. Dr. Cora Ortega, the physician who treated Luke. She was a small woman in her early 40s, with dark hair and intelligent eyes that seemed to miss nothing. Roman had met her twice before, once when Luke broke his arm falling from a tree, and again during a routine physical before one of Roman's deployments. Roman emerged from the tree lean as Dr. Ortega reached the center of the bridge. She turned at the sound of his footsteps, her expression a mixture of relief and apprehension. "Thank you for coming," she said. "I wasn't sure you'd get my message." "Dr. Ortega." Roman nodded respectfully. "I assume this is about Luke." Among other things, she glanced around nervously, as if expecting to be overheard. "Roman, I need to tell you something about the night your son was brought to the hospital. Something that doesn't add up." Roman waited, his expression neutral. In his experience, people revealed more when they weren't prompted. "Chester Durham brought Luke in around 12:30 a.m., Dr. Ortega continued. "Claimed he found the boy near Miller's Cave during a late-night hunting trip. But here's the thing. Luke's injuries weren't consistent with someone who'd been lost in the wilderness for hours." "Explain." "The hypothermia was real but mild. His core temperature was only down to 94 degrees. Uncomfortable but not life-threatening. More importantly, he had marks on his wrists and ankles. Rope burns hidden under his clothes." Roman's jaw tightened. "Someone tied him up. That's what I thought. But when I tried to ask Luke about it, he became agitated. Kept saying he couldn't remember, that everything was dark and cold. Then Regina arrived, and suddenly Luke wouldn't say anything at all." Dr. Ortega reached in her jacket and pulled out a manila envelope. "I took pictures of the marks before Regina arrived. Officially, they're not in Luke's medical file. I documented them as minor abrasions consistent with outdoor exposure. But I kept copies because something felt wrong." Roman opened the envelope and examined the photographs. The rope burns were clear and distinctive, showing a pattern consistent with restraints rather than accidental contact. Someone had tied his son up and left him in the wilderness to die. "There's more," Dr. Ortega said. "I've been thinking about this for days, and I remembered something. About 6 months ago, Regina came to see me. Said she was having trouble sleeping, wanted a prescription for anxiety medication. During the consultation, she asked some unusual questions." "What kind of questions?" "Medical questions about hypothermia. How long it would take someone to die from exposure, what the symptoms would look like, whether there would be any obvious signs of foul play. I thought it was academic curiosity, morbid fascination with medical conditions. But now," Roman studied the doctor's face, reading the genuine concern in her eyes. Dr. Ortega was risking her career by sharing this information, motivated by nothing more than a desire to protect a child. It was exactly the kind of moral courage Roman had come to value during his years of service. "Why are you telling me this?" he asked. "Because Luke is my patient, and his welfare is my responsibility. But also because—" She hesitated, then forged ahead. "Because Regina tried to convince me to sign a death certificate without an autopsy." "What?" 2 days ago. She came to my office, supposedly to thank me for treating Luke. But during the conversation, she mentioned how difficult it would be if something happened to you, how traumatic an autopsy would be for the family, how much simpler it would be if a doctor who knew the family could just sign the certificate based on obvious circumstances. Roman felt the familiar coldness that preceded combat operations. Regina wasn't just planning his death. She was already preparing to cover it up. "Dr. Ortega, I need you to do something for me," he said. "I need you to keep those photographs safe, and I need you to document everything Regina said to you. If something happens to me, make sure Sheriff Barr gets that information. Roman, if you're in danger, why don't you just leave? Take Luke and start over somewhere else." Roman shook his head. "Because they'll follow us. And because running away doesn't solve the problem, it just delays it. Regina and Durham have crossed a line. They've involved my son in their scheme, and they're planning to murder me for money. That's not something I can forgive or forget." Dr. Ortega studied his face, perhaps recognizing something in his expression that reminded her why soldiers were trained differently from civilians. "What are you going to do?" "What I've always done," Roman replied. "Complete the mission." Chapter 5. The Hunter and the Hunted. Roman spent the afternoon conducting surveillance on Chester Durham, following him from the sawmill to Murphy's Diner to a ramshackle trailer park on the wrong side of Millfield. Durham lived in a double-wide mobile home that had seen better decades, surrounded by the detritus of a life lived without ambition or accountability. From his position in the tree lane, Roman observed Durham's routine with the patience of a sniper. The man drank beer on his sagging porch, made phone calls while pacing around his yard, and seemed generally agitated in the way of someone whose plans weren't proceeding smoothly. At 1800 hours, Durham's phone rang. Roman was too far away to hear the conversation, but he could read body language. Durham's posture straightened, his voice became animated, and he began gesturing as if arguing with the caller. When the call ended, Durham went inside and emerged 15 minutes later wearing hunting clothes and carrying a rifle case. Roman followed at a distance as Durham drove his black pickup into the mountains, using logging roads that wound deeper into the Monongahela National Forest. The terrain was familiar to Roman from childhood hunting trips with his father and grandfather. These mountains held 1,000 hiding places, 1,000 ways for a man to disappear forever. Durham's truck turned into a clearing Roman recognized, Miller's Hollow, a hunting camp used by local sportsmen during deer season. The camp consisted of a small cabin, an equipment shed, and a clearing large enough for vehicles and camping gear. More importantly, it was the closest road access to Miller's Cave, where Luke had supposedly been found. Roman parked his truck on a forestry road half a mile away and proceeded on foot, using game trails and natural cover to approach the camp unseen. His military training served him well in these mountains. The skills that had kept him alive in Afghan valleys translated perfectly to West Virginia wilderness. As he drew closer, Roman could see Durham setting up what appeared to be a hunting blind near the cabin. But this wasn't deer season, and Durham's positioning suggested he was expecting human prey rather than wildlife. Roman's phone vibrated with a text message. Change of plans. Meet at Miller's Hollow at 2000 hours. Come alone. We need to talk. Regina. The pieces of the puzzle suddenly clicked into place. Regina was luring him to the exact spot where Durham was preparing an ambush. They'd planned this carefully, the concerned wife asking her estranged husband to meet for a reconciliation. The tragic hunting accident when a stray bullet found its target in the darkness. Roman smiled grimly. They'd made a fundamental error in assuming he would approach their trap with civilian caution rather than military precision. He circled the camp, noting sight lines and escape routes, identifying Durham's position and likely fields of fire. The hunting blind overlooked the clearing where vehicles would park, with additional cover behind the cabin and equipment shed. It was a competent ambush site for dealing with unsuspecting prey. Unfortunately for Durham, Roman McKinney was neither unsuspecting nor prey. Roman positioned himself on high ground overlooking the camp, settling into a sniper's hide he'd constructed from fallen logs and natural camouflage. From this position, he had clear sight lines to both the hunting blind and the access road. More importantly, he could observe without being observed. At 1930 hours, Regina's red Honda appeared on the logging road, headlights cutting through the growing darkness. She parked near the cabin and stepped out, wearing jeans and a heavy jacket that seemed inappropriate for a reconciliation meeting. Roman noted the bulge in her right jacket pocket, likely a pistol, though he couldn't be certain from this distance. Regina walked to the center of the clearing and checked her phone, presumably texting Roman to confirm he was coming. She seemed nervous, glancing frequently toward Durham's concealed position and the surrounding tree line. At exactly 2000 hours, Roman sent his own text message. I'm here, but not where you think. Regina's phone buzzed, and Roman watched her read the message through his rifle scope. Her reaction was immediate. Confusion followed by growing alarm as she realized their plan had been compromised. Durham emerged from his hiding place, rifle in hand, scanning the darkness with the desperate intensity of a man who just realized he was outmatched. Where is he? Durham called out, his voice carrying across the clearing. I don't know, Regina replied, panic creeping into her voice. He said he's here, but... Roman's voice cut through the night air. amplified by a small megaphone he brought from his tactical gear. "I'm here, Regina. Right where you wanted me to be." Both conspirators spun toward the sound, but Roman had positioned himself to create an acoustic illusion. His voice seemed to come from multiple directions at once, a psychological warfare technique he'd learned during urban combat training. "Let's talk about Luke," Roman continued, his voice echoing off the surrounding hills. "Let's talk about how you tied up my son and left him to die in these mountains. Let's talk about the insurance policy you're planning to collect after your hunting accident goes wrong." Regina and Durham exchanged panicked glances, their carefully orchestrated plan crumbling in real time. "Let's talk about how this ends," Roman concluded, and the threat in his voice was unmistakable. Chapter 6. Confession in the Dark. "Roman, please." Regina's voice cracked as she called out to the darkness. "Let me explain. This isn't what you think." From his concealed position, Roman watched the two conspirators huddle together near Regina's car, their body language revealing the depth of their panic. Durham clutched his rifle with white knuckles, swinging it back and forth as he tried to locate a target in the shadows. Regina pressed close to her lover, one hand on his arm, as if seeking protection from the husband she'd betrayed. "Then explain it." Roman's voice echoed from the hills, seeming to come from everywhere and nowhere. "Explain why my son had rope burns on his wrists. Explain why you asked Dr. Ortega about hypothermia 6 months ago. Explain the insurance policy." Durham's nerve broke first. "This is insane," he shouted, his voice high with stress. "We're leaving." He grabbed Regina's arm and started pulling her toward the car. Roman's next transmission stopped them cold. "Chester Durham. 2 DUIs, domestic violence conviction. Assault charges dropped when your ex-wife Tammy Crawford refused to testify. Currently unemployed, except for part-time work as a hunting guide and occasional shifts at Morrison Sawmill. Living in a trailer owned by your cousin Antonia Banks. Behind on rent for 3 months. Durham released Regina's arm, his face pale in the moonlight. "How do you? I know a lot of things, Chester. I know you and Regina have been planning this for months. I know you convinced her that killing me was the only way to access my life insurance. I know you're both stupid enough to think you could get away with it." Regina stepped forward, her hands raised in a gesture of surrender. "Roman, stop this. We never meant for Luke to get hurt. That was an accident." "An accident?" Roman's voice carried the cold precision of a man rendering judgment. "You tied up a 14-year-old boy and left him in the wilderness overnight. You were willing to let him die to cover your tracks." "No." Regina's protest was desperate now. "We just needed him out of the way for one night. We were going to come back for him after you murdered me." Roman's statement hung in the air like a physical weight. Durham raised his rifle, scanning the tree line with desperate intensity. "Show yourself, you coward. Face me like a man." Roman's laughter was harsh and without humor. "A man? You want to talk about being a man, Chester? A man doesn't prey on children. A man doesn't seduce another man's wife while he's serving his country. A man doesn't plan murder for insurance money. We didn't have a choice." Regina cried out. "You were never here, Roman. Always deployed, always putting the army first. I was lonely, and Chester was." "Chester was using you," Roman interrupted. "Just like he used his ex-wife before she finally got smart enough to leave him. Just like he's used every woman who was foolish enough to trust him." Durham's face twisted with rage. "You don't know anything about us. Regina loves me. We're going to be together. Are you?" Roman's voice carried a note of amusement. "Tell me, Regina, has Chester mentioned his other girlfriend? The one in Beckley he visits every Thursday when he tells you he's working late at the sawmill?" Regina turned to stare at Durham, confusion and hurt flickering across her face. "What is he talking about?" Durham's grip on his rifle wavered. "He's lying, Reggie, trying to turn us against each other. Her name is Brooke Beck," Roman continued relentlessly. "Bartender at the Mountaineer Tavern. 3 years younger than you. No children, no complications. He's been telling her the same lies he's been telling you, about leaving his current situation, starting over, building a life together. Chester." Regina's voice was small now, vulnerable in a way that made Roman remember the girl he'd fallen in love with 20 years ago. Durham spun toward her, his face desperate. Don't listen to him. He's trying to manipulate you. Like you manipulated her into betraying her husband and endangering her son. Roman's voice cut through Durham's protests. Like you manipulated her into thinking murder was the answer to her problems? Regina backed away from Durham, the full weight of her situation finally becoming clear. She betrayed everything that mattered for a man who'd been betraying her in return. I want to see Luke, she whispered. I want to see my son. Your son is safe, Roman replied. Safer than he's been in months. But whether you ever see him again depends on what happens in the next few minutes. Durham raised his rifle toward the sound of Roman's voice. Enough of this. Come out and face me, or I start shooting. Go ahead. Roman's voice was calm, almost conversational. Fire into the darkness at a target you can't see. Waste your ammunition on shadows and echoes. But remember, every shot you take tells me exactly where you are. The silence that followed was broken only by the wind in the trees and Durham's labored breathing. Roman could see the man's internal struggle, the desperate desire to fight warring with the growing realization that he was hopelessly outmatched. Here's what's going to happen, Roman continued. You're going to put down the rifle and walk to the center of the clearing. Both of you. And then you're going to tell me exactly how this was supposed to work. Every detail, every contingency, every lie you plan to tell. And if we don't, Durham's defiance was hollow now, the bravado of a man who'd run out of options. Roman's reply was quiet but carried the weight of absolute certainty. Then neither of you leaves these mountains alive. Chapter 7. The Reckoning. The confession came in pieces, extracted from Regina and Durham like shrapnel from a wound. They sat in the dirt of the clearing, hands visible, while Roman remained concealed in the darkness above them. His voice served as judge and prosecutor, patient and relentless in equal measure. Start from the beginning, Roman commanded. When did this start? Regina's voice was barely above a whisper. Last spring, after you left for your deployment. I was angry, tired of being alone all the time, tired of explaining to Luke why his father was never around for the important things. So you called your cousin. It wasn't like that. The protest was automatic but weak. Chester came to town for Grandma McKinney's funeral. We started talking, remembering old times. Durham shifted uncomfortably but said nothing. Roman could see the calculation in the man's eyes, wondering if cooperation might lead to mercy, not understanding that some betrayals put you beyond redemption. Tell him about the money, Roman said. The life insurance policy was always there, Regina continued. $500,000, double indemnity for accidental death. I never thought about it until Chester suggested it. Durham finally spoke up. She was drowning in debt, Roman. Credit cards, medical bills from when Luke broke his arm, mortgage payments she couldn't handle on her salary. The insurance was just sitting there. So you convinced her that murder was a better option than bankruptcy. It wasn't supposed to be murder. Regina's voice cracked. Chester said we could make it look like an accident. A hunting mishap, something that happened while you were out in the woods alone. No one would question it. Everyone knows soldiers sometimes have problems when they come back. Roman's voice turned deadly quiet. Problems. PTSD, Durham said, taking over the narrative. Veteran suicide rates, accidental shootings, risky behavior in the wilderness. We figure people would assume you'd either killed yourself or died because your military training made you overconfident in dangerous situations. And Luke. Regina's composure finally shattered completely. Luke was never supposed to be hurt. We just needed him out of the house that night, somewhere safe where he couldn't witness what happened or contradict our story. So you tied him up and left him in the wilderness. We were going to come back. Regina sobbed. After everything was over, Chester was going to find him during a search. Luke would have been cold and scared but safe. He would have been the traumatized son who lost his father, deserving of sympathy and support. Roman processed this information with the clinical detachment of an intelligence analyst. The plan had a brutal efficiency to it. Eliminate the husband, traumatize the child into compliance, collect the insurance money, and disappear into a new life funded by blood and betrayal. What went wrong? Durham answered this time. Luke fought harder than we expected, got loose from the rope somehow, and started making noise. We had to relocate him deeper in the cave system, tie him up again with better knots. By the time we finished, it was too late to implement the rest of the plan. So you decided to wait. We were going to try again the next night, Regina admitted. But then Luke got hypothermic faster than we anticipated. Chester panicked and brought him to the hospital before we could complete the operation. Roman felt a cold satisfaction at learning his enemy's weakness. They'd failed because they were amateurs, cruel enough to conceive a plan, but too incompetent to execute it properly. That incompetence had saved both Luke's life and his own. The anonymous tip, Roman said. Who sent it? Regina and Durham exchanged glances. What tip? Regina asked. Interesting. Someone else was involved in this situation, someone with enough awareness to warn Roman, but not enough courage to come forward directly. Roman filed that information away for later investigation. Here's what happens next, Roman announced. Chester, you're going to walk to your truck and drive away. You're going to keep driving until you're out of West Virginia, and you're never going to come back. Durham struggled to his feet, hope flickering in his eyes. And that's it? You let me go. I said you were going to drive away. I didn't say you were going to make it to the state line. The hope died instantly. Durham understood that Roman wasn't offering mercy. He was offering a head start in a hunt that would end only one way. Regina, you're going to get in your car and drive to the sheriff's office. You're going to confess everything, the affair, the insurance scheme, what you did to Luke. You're going to take full responsibility and cooperate completely with the investigation. Roman, please. The alternative is that I handle this my way without involving the legal system. And my way doesn't include trials or appeals or the possibility of parole. Regina nodded through her tears, understanding that she was being offered the only chance at survival she was likely to receive. One more thing, Roman added. If either of you ever contacts Luke again, if you ever come within 100 miles of him, if you ever speak his name to another living soul, I will find you. And when I do, what happens next will make tonight look like a friendly conversation. Durham was already backing toward his truck, his rifle forgotten in his haste to escape. Regina remained seated in the dirt, her face buried in her hands. Go, Roman commanded. Both of you. Now. As the two vehicles disappeared down the mountain road, Roman emerged from his concealment for the first time that night. The clearing seemed smaller somehow, diminished by the absence of the people who tried to turn it into his grave. He picked up Durham's abandoned rifle and ejected the chambered round, studying the cartridge in the moonlight. A .30-06 hunting round, perfectly legal, readily available, and capable of killing a man at considerable distance. It would have been the bullet that ended his life if he'd approached this meeting with trust instead of suspicion. Roman pocketed the cartridge as evidence and began the methodical process of clearing the scene. There would be no physical proof that tonight's confrontation had ever taken place. When the authorities found Chester Durham's truck wrapped around a tree on Highway 9, it would appear to be a single vehicle accident caused by excessive speed and alcohol consumption. When Regina McKinney confessed to attempted murder and child endangerment, there would be no corroborating evidence except her own words. The war was over, but the victory belonged to the soldier who'd learned long ago that the only unforgivable sin was leaving enemies alive to threaten what you loved. Chapter 8. Loose Ends. Roman found Chester Durham's black pickup truck 3 miles down Highway 9, wrapped around a massive oak tree with the kind of violence that suggested excessive speed and a complete loss of control. The impact had been so severe that the engine block had been driven into the cab, making survival impossible for anyone not wearing a seatbelt, which Durham hadn't been wearing, according to the evidence Roman had carefully arranged. The empty beer bottles scattered around the wreckage told their own story. A man drinking heavily while driving dangerous mountain roads, his judgment impaired by alcohol and desperation. The investigating officers would find Durham's blood alcohol level well above the legal limit, thanks to the whiskey Roman had forced down the unconscious man's throat before positioning him behind the wheel. It was a textbook single-vehicle fatality, the kind that happened with tragic regularity on West Virginia's winding mountain highways. No witnesses, no suspicious circumstances, no reason for anyone to question the obvious explanation. Roman stood in the tree line watching the emergency responders work, their flashing lights painting the crash scene in alternating red and blue. Sheriff Saul Barr moved through the wreckage with the methodical precision of a man who'd seen too many similar scenes, documenting everything for a report that would be filed and forgotten within a month. Roman's phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. Justice has been served. Thank you. A friend. This time, Roman didn't delete the message. Someone had been watching tonight's events unfold. Someone with enough knowledge to understand what had really happened. Roman needed to identify this unknown ally before closing the final chapter of his revenge. He made his way back to his truck and drove to the Millfield County Sheriff's Office, arriving just as Regina's red Honda pulled into the parking lot. Through his windshield, he could see her sitting behind the wheel, gathering the courage to walk inside and confess to crimes that would destroy her life. Roman waited in the darkness, watching his wife of 16 years prepare to face the consequences of her betrayal. She looked smaller somehow, diminished by the weight of her guilt and the knowledge of what she'd lost. The woman who'd once been the center of his universe had become a stranger, someone capable of endangering their child for money and revenge. Regina finally emerged from her car and walked toward the sheriff's office entrance, her steps slow and reluctant. She paused at the door, turned to look back at the parking lot, as if sensing Roman's presence, then disappeared inside the building. Roman didn't follow. He had no desire to witness Regina's confession or to see her taken into custody. That chapter of his life was over, closed as definitively as Chester Durham's had been on Highway 9. Instead, he drove to the youth shelter where Luke was staying, a converted Victorian house that served as a temporary refuge for children in crisis. The facility was run by Teresa Stevenson, Sheriff Barr's sister, a former social worker who dedicated her life to protecting kids from the failures of the adults who were supposed to love them. Roman parked outside and sat for a moment, preparing himself for the most important conversation of his life. Luke had been through trauma that no child should endure. Abandoned by his mother, used as a pawn in a murder plot, forced to confront the reality that the people he trusted most had been willing to sacrifice him for money. The front porch light came on as Roman approached the house, and Teresa appeared in the doorway. She was a woman in her early 50s with graying hair and kind eyes that had seen too much suffering but hadn't lost their compassion. "Roman," she said softly, "Luke's been waiting for you. How is he? Physically? He's fine. Emotionally?" She shrugged. "He's a strong kid, but what he's been through would break most adults. He knows something terrible almost happened, even if he doesn't understand all the details." Teresa led Roman through the house to a small sitting room where Luke sat reading a paperback novel. The boy looked up as his father entered, and Roman felt his heart break at the mixture of relief and wariness in his son's eyes. "Dad." Luke's voice was carefully neutral, the tone of someone who'd learned not to trust completely. "Hey, buddy." Roman sat in the chair across from his son, studying the face that was so much like his own at that age. "How are you feeling?" "Confused," Luke admitted. "Mom said you were coming home to take me away from her. Said you blamed her for what happened to me in the mountains. But Sheriff Barr says she's the one who hurt me." Roman chose his words carefully. "Your mother made some very bad choices, Luke. Choices that put you in danger and nearly destroyed our family. But that doesn't mean she doesn't love you. Then why did she do it?" It was the question Roman had been dreading, because the honest answer was too complex and too painful for a 14-year-old to fully understand. How could he explain that love sometimes turned into something twisted and selfish? How could he help his son comprehend that the woman who'd given birth to him had been willing to sacrifice him for money? "People sometimes do terrible things when they're scared or desperate," Roman said finally. "Your mother thought she was trapped in a situation she couldn't escape from, and she made choices that seemed logical to her at the time. That doesn't excuse what she did, but it might help explain it." Luke nodded slowly, processing this information with the careful consideration of someone who'd been forced to grow up too quickly. "What happens now?" the boy asked. "Now we start over," Roman replied. "Just you and me, somewhere far from here." I'm retiring from the army, and we're going to find a place where we can build a new life together. What about Mom? Roman met his son's eyes directly. Your mother's going to prison, Luke. For a very long time. What she did to you, what she planned to do to me, those are serious crimes with serious consequences. Luke was quiet for a long moment, staring at his hands. When he looked up again, there were tears in his eyes, but also something that looked like relief. I'm glad you're okay, Dad. When they left me in that cave, I thought I'd never see you again. Roman moved to the couch and pulled his son into a fierce embrace, feeling the boy's tears soak into his shirt. They sat that way for a long time, father and son mourning the family they'd lost while finding strength in what remained. I love you, Luke, Roman whispered, and I promise you, nothing like this will ever happen again. I'll never let anyone hurt you again. I know, Luke replied, and Roman heard the absolute trust in his son's voice. It was a trust he'd earned through years of keeping his promises, and one he intended to honor for the rest of his life. Outside, the autumn wind carried the sound of sirens as emergency responders finished cleaning up Chester Durham's final mistake. But inside the shelter, a father and son began the long process of healing from betrayal and building something new from the ashes of what they'd lost. Chapter 9, New Beginnings. 6 months later, Roman McKinney stood on the deck of a cabin overlooking Lake Tahoe, watching his son cast a fishing line into the clear mountain water. The California sun was warm on his face, a welcome change from the cold mountains of West Virginia and the memories they held. Luke had grown 3 inches since they'd left Millfield, filling out with the rapid development of adolescence. More importantly, the wariness had faded from his eyes, replaced by the natural confidence of a boy who knew his father would protect him from anything. Roman's phone buzzed with a text message from Sheriff Salbar. Regina pleaded guilty to attempted murder and child endangerment. 25 years minimum. Thought you should know. Roman deleted the message without replying. Regina McKinney was part of a past he'd left behind, a cautionary tale about the price of betrayal and the consequences of choosing weakness over loyalty. Dad, Luke called from the dock. I think I've got something. Roman walked down to help his son reel in what turned out to be a respectable rainbow trout, the fish fighting hard before surrendering to superior strategy and patience. They released it back into the lake, watching it disappear into the depths with a flash of silver scales. Think we should head back? Luke asked, checking his watch. Dr. Martinez said she wanted to see you at 3. Dr. Elena Martinez was Luke's therapist, a skilled professional who'd helped the boy process the trauma of his mother's betrayal without losing his capacity for trust. The sessions had been difficult at first. Luke had been reluctant to discuss what had happened, afraid that talking about it would somehow make it real again. But Dr. Martinez had patience and skill, and gradually Luke had begun to open up about his experiences. Roman attended every session, learning how to recognize the signs of anxiety and depression, how to provide support without being overprotective, how to help his son heal without rushing the process. Actually, Roman said, Dr. Martinez wanted to see both of us today. She says you're making excellent progress. They walked back to the cabin, a modest 3-bedroom structure Roman had purchased with cash from his military savings and retirement benefits. It was isolated enough to provide privacy, but close enough to town that Luke could attend the local high school and participate in normal teenage activities. Roman had enrolled Luke in martial arts classes and wilderness survival courses, teaching him skills that would build confidence and self-reliance. The boy showed natural aptitude for both, approaching each challenge with a methodical determination he'd inherited from his father. At Dr. Martinez's office, Luke settled into his usual chair while Roman took the seat beside him. The therapist was a woman in her 40s with warm eyes and an easy manner that put even reluctant patients at ease. Luke's been telling me about the fishing trip you're planning, Dr. Martinez began. Alaska, isn't it? 2 weeks on the Kenai Peninsula, Roman confirmed. Fishing, hiking, camping under the stars. Luke's been researching the area for months. It sounds wonderful. Luke, how do you feel about spending that much time in the wilderness? Luke considered the question seriously. Excited, he said finally, I know Dad won't let anything happen to me, and I want to prove to myself that I'm not afraid of being outside anymore. Dr. Martinez nodded approvingly. That's a very mature attitude. Roman, do you have any concerns about the trip? Only that Luke might catch a bigger salmon than I do, Roman replied, earning a laugh from his son. After the session, they drove into town for supplies, stopping at the hardware store for camping gear and the bookstore for maps and field guides. Lake Tahoe was a tourist destination, but it was also a working community where newcomers could blend in without attracting unwanted attention. Roman had established a new identity for both of them, legitimate documents obtained through contacts in military intelligence, complete with background histories that would survive casual investigation. To their neighbors, they were Marcus and David Wells, a retired veteran and his son starting over after a family tragedy. At the grocery store, they encountered Patty McGowan, a local teacher who'd befriended Luke during his first weeks at the new school. She was a woman in her 30s with red hair and freckles, divorced with no children of her own, but a natural affinity for young people. "Luke," she called out, approaching with a cart full of school supplies. "Are you ready for the science fair next month?" "Working on it," Luke replied with a grin. "Dad's helping me build a weather monitoring station with remote sensors." "That sounds ambitious. Will you be entering the regional competition if you win locally?" Roman watched the interaction with quiet satisfaction. Luke was building new relationships, forming connections that had nothing to do with the trauma he'd experienced. The boy was healing, growing stronger, becoming the person he was meant to be before betrayal and violence had tried to break him. That evening, they sat on the deck watching the sunset paint the lake in shades of gold and crimson. Luke was reading a novel, science fiction this time, about exploration and discovery in distant galaxies. Roman worked on cleaning his fishing equipment, the routine maintenance that kept gear reliable and functional. "Dad," Luke's voice was thoughtful. "Do you think about her? About Mom?" Roman set down the reel he'd been cleaning and considered the question. "Sometimes," he admitted, "I think about the woman I married, the person she was before everything went wrong. But that person doesn't exist anymore, Luke. People change, and sometimes they change into someone you can't recognize or forgive." "Do you hate her?" "No," Roman said truthfully. "Hate requires energy I'd rather spend on more important things, like making sure you grow up to be a good man who makes good choices." Luke nodded, processing this information with the careful consideration that had become his habit when discussing difficult topics. "I don't want to see her again," he said quietly. "Even when I'm older, even if she gets out of prison." "Is that wrong?" Roman moved to sit beside his son, putting an arm around the boy's shoulders. "That's not wrong, Luke. That's self-preservation. You don't owe forgiveness to someone who hurt you, no matter what relationship you used to have with them. Some betrayals are unforgivable, and some bridges can't be rebuilt once they're burned." They sat in comfortable silence as darkness fell over the lake, father and son united by shared experience and mutual loyalty. In the distance, a loon called across the water, its voice echoing off the surrounding mountains like a promise of wilderness and freedom. Roman McKinney had completed his final mission. He'd protected his son, eliminated his enemies, and built a new life from the ashes of betrayal. The soldier was finally at peace, his duty done and his honor intact. Some men fought for country, others for ideology or glory. Roman had fought for something simpler and more important: the right of a father to protect his child and the obligation to make betrayers pay for their crimes. In the end, that was enough. That was everything. And there you have it. Another story comes to an end. What did you think? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoy this story, consider joining our community by subscribing. It means the world to us. For more stories like this one, check out the recommended videos on screen, and I'll see you there.